Crypto during a bull run is dominated by what's called narratives. And understanding these narratives, as well as knowing the narratives that might be popular in the future, can make you a fortune. In this video, I'm going to cover all the various narratives that I know of in the space, give a simple explanation of what they are, and the ones that I think are personally worth paying attention to. But really quick, I have 3 different goals this cycle. My first goal is to make 1,000% gain with my overall portfolio, turning every $1,000 invested into $10,000. My second goal is to make a 5,000% gain with my overall portfolio, turning every $1,000 invested into $50,000. And my third goal is to make a 10,000% gain with my overall portfolio, turning every $1,000 invested into $100,000. Last cycle, I was able to do around 4,000% overall with my total portfolio, turning every single $1,000 I invested into $40,000. And so far this cycle, I've made around 419% overall for my total portfolio. Okay, so narratives are basically just themes on what investors are currently excited about in the space. This same kind of thing happens in the stock market. Recently, AI has been the narrative in the stock market, where any AI company has just been skyrocketing because that's what investors are really excited about. But because in the crypto space, people tend to understand crypto far less, narratives tend to have a much more outsized effect on the overall market. Meaning, if you could nail the right narrative at the right time, you can make an absolute fortune. I've done it many times, I've seen it happen many times, and I also missed it many times. Okay, so to start off with, the first narrative that we're going to dive into is currently one of the hottest narratives in the space, and that's restaking. Restaking as a concept is often confused and misunderstood. The concept was popularized by Eigenlayer. Eigenlayer is a project that aims to allow restaking for Ethereum validators. Basically, to put it really simply, it would allow other projects and apps to build using Ethereum's core security, but for really, really cheap. It also means a lot more yield for Ethereum validators who can take their ETH, which currently is staking for around 4%, securing the Ethereum network, and they can restake that ETH to secure essentially a limitless number of other chains and apps. This, in a nutshell, is the concept of restaking. And the current thought process in the space is, well, okay, if people can take their ETH and they can, earn 4% on, say, Ethereum, and then they can restake it and maybe earn 1% on this other chain, and then they can restake it again and earn another 5% on this chain, and again, and again, and again, does that mean that people are going to be able to juice up their yields to like 10%, 30%, 100%, 500%? Like, how high can you go restaking your ETH over and over again? And to take it even further, there are currently already projects building around this concept of liquid restaking. Basically, imagine you take your ETH, you stake it, and then you restake it for a bunch of different chains. And then you create a token that represents your staked ETH and that accrues all the yield that is coming from restaking on all these different chains. Now imagine what you could do with that token that's earning all this yield from restaking and all the weird, crazy DeFi products that could be built. Now, before some of you guys call this a Ponzi, because it sounds very risky, it sounds crazy, it sounds like rehypothecation. You're taking your yield and you're restaking it over and over again. Is that leverage? Isn't that dangerous? You should know that some of the smartest people in the space think that restaking is possibly one of the greatest innovations since the creation of smart contracts. There is actually a lot more to restaking than meets the eye, and I'm just giving you a really simplistic explanation. If you want to go really in depth, I have an entire podcast where I interview Sriram, the founder of Eigenlayer, and go into all these different things. And I personally rate overall restaking as a narrative you're going to want to keep a close eye on this cycle because I expect it to be pretty huge. Some projects to watch include, of course, Eigenlayer, but also Swell, EtherFi, Prisma, Puffer, KelpDAO, and I'm sure there's others I'm missing, and those are just the ones I know off the top of the head. The next narrative to watch is crypto AI, or DAI. And this one's super simple. It's the concept of crypto and AI merged together and all the unique use cases and things that might function in that like overlapping space. Or even how crypto might help AI or keep AI in check, or maybe how AI might help crypto. And I've heard all sorts of takes in the space that AI, because it's digital and they can't open their own bank accounts, they're going to want to use crypto. They're going to want to use digital dollars. That makes a lot of sense. There's also a lot of people playing around with crypto as an incentive structure to fund open source AI development. A lot of this development is unfunded. Crypto is really good at raising money for a lot of things, including a lot of incredibly stupid things. So of course, it could be potentially a great mechanism to fund open source AI development. There's also, of course, the DePin sector and projects like Akash, which are building out AI physical infrastructure and allowing people to rent out their unused GPUs to train a lot of these AI models. My personal take is that the current batch of crypto AI projects projects are 99% low quality garbage. But regardless, I think a lot of these tokens, even though they are garbage, will probably perform well during this cycle because there's just a lot of hype around AI this cycle. There also are a few good projects in the space that are actually interesting. Some projects include BitTensor, which they're building an open source AI using crypto to bootstrap funds and incentivize development. Akash and Render, which are essentially the Airbnb of compute. Think of something like NVIDIA or Amazon's AWS. Mosaic, AI built custom for DeFi trading purposes. LivePeer, which is like DePin infrastructure. Specifically think for things like Midjourney or like DALL-E 3, like generative AI. The next narrative to keep an eye on is intents. Intents are a subcategory of the interoperability narrative, which we'll get into later. Intents are basically a shift in how DEXs and bridges operate that benefit users by making things cheaper and faster. A really simple way to think about intents is imagine you had like this app where you said, hey, you wanted a milkshake for $7 or cheaper, and you were willing to pay $2 for delivery. Then imagine on this app, there were hundreds of what's called solvers who tried to compete to fulfill this order. And as far as you're concerned, you don't care where they buy this milkshake. You don't care how they deliver it to you. If it's by boat, if it's by plane, helicopter, if they like airdrop it to you, it doesn't matter to you. You just want it at the cheapest price possible. And you want it as fast as possible. And you let them figure out all the details. That's like an abstract way to think about how intents work. And they're a game changer for crypto because they make things a lot easier, cheaper, and faster for the end user. This is actually a really cool new concept in crypto and something to definitely keep an eye on. Some projects to watch include CowSwap, Across, and Connect, which, by the way, shameless podcast shilling right here. I have a podcast episode with CowSwap and a podcast episode with Across where I dive into both projects, how they work, how they function, a lot more about intents if that's something you're wanting to learn about. Next up, another crypto narrative to watch is crypto gaming or GameFi. And I personally think crypto gaming is going to be one of the largest narratives come next cycle, especially when retail starts showing up and investing in the space. And I think that'll be alongside crypto AI. So I think crypto gaming and crypto AI are going to be the biggest narratives as far as retail is concerned, because those are the two easiest things for them to understand. When they show up, they're gonna be like, I don't really understand what intents are. I don't really understand what restaking is, but I know what AI is and I know what gaming is. And so I'm gonna bet on those things. Crypto gaming is an easy concept to understand. It's the concept of digital collectibles and digital ownership inside of games. Basically, think of Fortnite. People spend hundreds or sometimes thousands of dollars on digital skins in Fortnite that they don't actually own and they can't ever resell. And for the player, it would of course be better if they could, when they get bored of that skin, go and sell it on the open market. It's a far better user experience, but also it allows these skins to actually accrue value over the price that you actually paid for them. Think of things like sports cards. There are sports cards that are worth millions of dollars, even though they're just a piece of cardboard that's essentially been printed on. They are worth millions of dollars because there are collectors that are willing to pay that much to buy them. And I think crypto gaming is going to be a super narrative this cycle because a lot of those games and a lot of these companies that raised a ton of funds back in 2020 and 2021 have had multiple years now to actually build and implement quality games. And with hundreds of crypto games coming to market between this year and next year, the odds are really high we have at least one breakout success. Some projects to watch are Immutable, which is the IMX token, Polygon, which Immutable is actually partnered with Polygon, and between the two of them, they control something like 70% of all new crypto games coming to market. Perion, which is a small cap crypto DAO that invests in early stage games like Shrapnel and Gunzilla's Off the Grid and builds their own products as well. Shrap, which is a game I just mentioned, a AAA game from a studio with ex-talent from Call of Duty, Destiny, and more. Off the Grid, which doesn't have a token yet, but it's massively hyped. It looks really good, and we've already had big streamers like Dr. Disrespect stream early previews of this game. This is one of the tokens you can actually get early access to by buying the perk token from Perion because they did an early stage investment into Gunzilla's gun token. There's Ori, a Pokemon-like game on Solana. With Palworld coming out of nowhere and being like this mega success hit in the gaming space, I think Ori could potentially be a good play, and it's decently small as far as cryptos go. And of course, there's a ton of other crypto gaming tokens. It's difficult to cover them all here. Now, I still have plenty of other crypto narratives to cover, but really quick, before I continue, I just wanted to say that I filled up all slots for membership for Obsidian Council, and it is now currently full. Obsidian Council is my private community where I share my personal research, monthly airdrop guides, my entire portfolio, updates when I buy and sell. We have in-person meetups, a ton of other resources. It's really an awesome community. If you missed out and you want to be able to jump in next time it opens, there's a waitlist in the description of this video. Make sure to sign up. The next crypto narrative to keep an eye on is airdrops. Now, you might be thinking that airdrops don't really count as a narrative, but in my opinion, they actually are. Airdrops, or really the anticipation of airdrops, has had an outsized effect on token prices for any tokens where people perceive they could get an airdrop by owning or staking that token. Think of tokens like Celestia or Dimension. Because staking these tokens allows you to potentially earn future airdrops, a lot of people have been buying them up and staking them. And that's led to a pretty decent appreciation in price for both of those projects. And my personal take is 2024 is going to be a mega year as far as airdrops goes. There's just a ton of projects who've sat on the sidelines waiting to launch a token for like favorable conditions. And now that we have favorable conditions, a lot of them are launching tokens. So when it comes to this narrative, it's useful to look for any tokens that might kind of have overlap into this area where people might say, hey, if I own or stake this token, I could get airdrops, and getting in those tokens early before the market figures it out, reacts, and the price already goes up. I already mentioned Celestia and Dimension. They've gone up pretty decently already. There's also Polygon's Pole token, which isn't out yet, but because Polygon's Pole token is going to secure like a ton of different chains and apps, etc., I could see people giving airdrops to Pole stakers, so that could be one to watch as well. The next narrative to watch is interoperability. This is basically the concept of different blockchains being able to communicate and pass tokens between each other seamlessly and easily. And it's like the mega narrative because in its final form, it basically enables crypto's version of the internet. And we have all sorts of projects trying to tackle this concept and problem from a ton of different angles. You currently have bridges, which are kind of like a hobbled together solution that try to solve this problem, but do it with a lot of frictions and don't really do it very well or in a meaningful way that makes a difference. You have concepts like Optimism's Superchain, which aligns on this concept of shared standards and shared infrastructure, but fails to enable anything currently like true interoperability. It's more like, these things are like slightly more compatible, but it's not like you can just seamlessly move between the chains. You have the concept of intents, which is something I talked about earlier, which in theory could enable cross-chain swapping between chains in literally seconds. But it's kind of in a roundabout way because you're using solvers and there's people that are just holding different amounts of tokens on different chains. It's not true interoperability, but it does enable some of the same features and it is a piece of that puzzle. You have things like Chainlink's CCIP, which is again, another way this could potentially work. And in my opinion, currently the closest thing that we have to true interoperability is Polygon's aggregation layer, which when fully deployed later this year will enable sub 5-second bridging between chains that use the aggregation layer, allow cross-chain transactions without you even really feeling like you're using multiple chains. This enables a universe of highly specialized chains to do really specialized things, opening up way more use cases and possibilities within the crypto space. Projects to watch are Polygon, Across, Connext, CowSwap, Chainlink, Optimism. I'm sure there's more. Those are just the ones I know off the top of my head. The next crypto narrative to watch is ZK, or Zero Knowledge. And I'm going to have to speed this up because there's a lot more narratives to cover. And if I go too in depth on every one, this video is just going to take forever. ZK is actually one of the most insane breakthroughs in the crypto space and currently a very early narrative. It stands for Zero Knowledge, and put really simply, it allows you to essentially prove things without having to know everything about that thing. And really, this is one area that I'm still personally exploring, and I have a lot to learn in this area myself. But I do have a couple of podcasts scheduled with some of the smartest people when it comes to ZK, the people that are on the forefront, on the bleeding edge of the space. I'm going to have a couple interviews and podcast episodes where we're going to dive into how ZK works and all of that kind of stuff. So make sure you subscribe to the podcast if that's something that you're interested in. But anyways, this is genuinely an insane breakthrough in the space, and expect to hear more and more about ZK as time goes on. Projects to watch are Polygon, who basically has the best ZK team in the space, Aztec, which is like a privacy chain that uses ZK, ZK Sync, Scroll, and I'm sure there's a bunch of others. Just again, a lot of them don't have tokens yet because ZK is still really early. After that, the next narrative to watch is privacy. This is another one I also think is a little bit of a ways off, but it's going to enable a ton of new use cases that we don't have in crypto today. The reality is there's just a lot of things you can't do on chain when you don't have any form of privacy. Think of like healthcare records and all these corporate files and literally anything sensitive that you can't publicly have on display. Projects to watch include Aztec, Polygon Maiden, Namada, and more. After privacy, the next narrative to watch is layer 2s. Layer 2s are basically blockchains built on top of other blockchains, and mostly encompass blockchains built on top of Ethereum, but there are other L2 ecosystems, notably Bitcoin, that are starting to emerge. L2s have massively reduced costs, being that they don't have to pay for their own security and instead rent security from the underlying L1 that they're built on top of. To put really simply, it's a huge reduction in expenses, allowing a lot of these blockchains to be profitable. It also allows for and opens up a ton more experimentation. Basically, think of blockchains that are built with many different pieces. Like it might use something like Ethereum's L1 for settlement, but then it might use something like Celestia for its data availability. It's like a big hodgepodge of different pieces of different blockchains all put together. Outside of Ethereum, Bitcoin layer 2s are currently a really popular narrative. I won't dive too deep into them, but they're also one you want to keep an eye on. Projects to watch include Stacks, Optimism, Arbitrum, Eclipse, Polygon, ZK Sync, Base, scroll, and honestly, so many different projects, it's absurd. After layer 2s, the next narrative to watch is DeFi. DeFi was maybe the hottest narrative next to NFTs during last cycle, and it stands for decentralized finance. DeFi is still a narrative you want to keep an eye on. It has been maturing over the past couple years and built a really resilient infrastructure that has survived, frankly, some insane things that have happened over the past couple years. And when it comes to DeFi, you can just think of like all this normal stuff you would do in normal finance. So you have like decentralized options, decentralized perps, decentralized loans and exchanges, and all kinds of yield products and things like that. Projects to keep an eye on include Redacted, Prisma, Swell, Pendle, Eigenlayer, Lido, SNX, GMX, Polygon, Ethereum, Solana, Jupiter, and literally like a million others. The next narrative to watch is GambleFi. GambleFi is basically just crypto gambling. And the basic concept is super simple. A lot of people in crypto are really risk adverse and they have a lot of money. So why not create tailor-made platforms that allow people in crypto to gamble on sports or casino-like slot games and different things like that. And the big advantage a lot of these platforms have is, for one, they're available globally. So a typical maybe gambling app might be available in the US, or it's maybe available in the UK. And a lot of these ones are available to a global market. The second advantage is a lot of these platforms have their own token that allow token holders to capture a share of the revenues coming through the app, essentially allowing the players to also be the house, which is kind of important because the house always wins and players do not win quite as much. That's the basic concept of what's currently succeeding in that space. There are more advanced on-chain options, kind of like DeFi, where people are trying to build these apps less centralized and fully on-chain, which is a massive undertaking and so far hasn't been super fruitful, but it is still early days. And just so you understand how absurdly successful some of these apps already are, Rollbit, one of the fastest growing crypto gambling apps, does around $63 million in monthly revenue. Projects to keep an eye on include Rollbit, Kineko, Winner, and more. The next narrative to keep an eye on is stablecoins. Stablecoins have maybe the clearest product market fit in all of crypto. They are money printing machines, literally and figuratively. Stablecoins are the 16th largest holder of US treasuries, meaning they hold more US treasuries than some countries like South Korea and Australia. And even the government is starting to recognize some of the benefits that stablecoin bring to the table when it comes to things like buying up US debt. Stablecoin protocols like Maker make hundreds of millions of dollars in annual revenue. And Tether, the largest stablecoin out there, makes around $2 billion or more per quarter in revenue. I expect stablecoins to continue growing throughout this cycle, and I also expect this cycle to see some new innovative models for stablecoins that could potentially disrupt the market. Projects to watch include Maker, Frax, Prisma, Redacted Cartel, Olympus, and more. Next up is LSTs. These are liquid staked tokens. So basically you stake your ETH and then get a token representing that staked ETH that you can go do things with. This was a huge narrative during crypto winter, but it's currently having a lot of its momentum eaten up by restaking tokens, which I'm gonna get into that in a second. In my opinion though, it's still one worth keeping an eye on. Projects to watch in the space include Lido, Rocket Pool, Swell, Prisma, Redacted Cartel, and more. After that is RSTs, or restaking tokens. These are very similar, and I mostly already covered what restaking tokens are earlier in the video. I expect restaking tokens to be a huge narrative going into 2024 and 2025. Projects to watch include Swell, Prisma, EtherFi, Eigenlayer, Pendle, and more. The next narrative to watch after that is real-world assets, or RWAs. There are trillions and trillions of dollars of illiquid real-world assets that, if tokenized and brought on-chain, would open up an entire new world of use cases, concepts, and liquidity. Basically, think of TradFi taking all their TradFi things and putting them on-chain. That's kind of like the real-world asset narrative in a nutshell. The problem with this narrative is there's still a lot of red tape. This is like having to deal with legacy systems, ton of government regulation. It's just going to be a really slow process. The upside is TradFi is very much interested in tokenizing assets, so it is really just a matter of time. Projects to watch include Chainlink, Goldfinch, Maple, and more. The next narrative to watch is DSOC, or Decentralized Social Media. This is a really, really neat concept. Basically, all social media platforms today are owned by these corporate entities. As a creator, if you slave away and you produce all this content and put it on these platforms, you don't actually own your audience, and these corporations can take it away from you anytime they want. And that's not just like a theoretical thing. They do that all the time. There are so many creators that get deplatformed for any number of reasons. A second thing about these corporate social media networks is that nobody else can build on them. Like on the Facebook network, only Facebook can build on it. Early days, you had things like Zynga and all these games and apps being built on Facebook, but Facebook could anytime they want shut those things down on a whim, which is actually what they ended up doing. Decentralized social media aims to build something different. Platforms where the creators truly own their audience, and platforms where anyone can build a business and innovation is left to the open market. And this is a really awesome concept. It would honestly take an entire video to dive into this concept, but there are already some really good apps in this space, including things like Farcaster and Lens, which, by the way, I'm on Farcaster. There's a link in the description of this video if you want to go follow me and check out what Farcaster is all about. And we're already seeing some really interesting innovations and things happening on these social media apps that doesn't happen on things like Facebook. Specifically on Farcaster, they have these things called Farcaster frames, which are like sort of like mini apps built into the social media platform. The next narrative to watch, which is a pretty hyped narrative, is the DePin narrative. DePin stands for Decentralized Physical Infrastructure. And these are basically projects that use crypto to essentially incentivize and bootstrap massive infrastructure networks. A really easy one to understand is think of Helium with their 5G network. Obviously, it'd be insanely expensive and really difficult for any new startup to build out their own 5G network. That's why you don't really ever see any startups or innovation when it comes to like these wireless infrastructure networks. Helium, though, it's created the first 5G network owned by users. So like users go buy these like devices, set them up around or in their house or whatever, creating their own overlapping 5G network, which, by the way, that's live today. You can go buy a cell phone plan on that network today. You have projects like Akash, which is creating what they call a super cloud. It basically aims to compete with Amazon's AWS. There's even a newer startup working on their own version of a decentralized Uber. After that, the next narrative to watch is Memecoins. Memecoins are something I almost never personally touch, but they are a meaningful narrative-driven sector that can turn $1,000 into $1 million if you're lucky enough. Memecoins are basically pure speculative madness. You vote for the ones that you think are funny with your money, and if you have good taste and a good eye for narratives, you could make a small fortune. After that, the next narrative to watch is NFTs. There's been a lot of news articles going around saying that NFTs are dead, but I personally expect NFTs to continue to flourish and prosper throughout this cycle. Last cycle, the most popular type of NFT was what's called the PFP NFT, or a profile picture NFT. And I expect these style of NFTs to actually stick around. A lot of people are saying that they're dead, that they was just like a fad, but I don't agree with that. I think that people actually love flexing with these things and they're going to stick around. I also think we're going to see a lot of new and different types of NFTs this cycle, including a lot of gaming NFTs and just weird experiments. And I'm not personally up to speed on most NFTs. It is one sector that I'm personally light on, but I do personally own and like Mad Lads. The next narrative to watch is Perps. Perps was a super popular narrative during the bear market that has died down quite a bit since then. But the basic concept is on-chain perpetuals, or like on-chain leverage. People taking $1,000, levering it up to 100, so it's now the equivalent of $100,000, and then just seeing what happens. Most times what happens is they get liquidated, they lose all their money. But people that are really good at it can make a lot of money doing this. And traditionally, perps have been exclusive to centralized exchanges. So we didn't have these things on-chain, and they make a lot of money for centralized exchanges. Even today, the vast majority of perpetuals is done on centralized exchanges, and I expect that to slowly shift over time to mostly being on chain, and some of these different perps platforms could grow to be massive. And projects to watch in this sector include SNX, GMX, there's a ton of others, but those are the two that I'm familiar with. After that, the next narrative to watch is Onchain Options. Onchain Options have been trying to be a thing for a long time in the crypto space. And so far, they really haven't got a ton of traction. There's not like a ton of interest in them so far. But some of that comes from the fact that they haven't been very good so far. There hasn't been a ton of liquidity on them. Just people have been playing around with how to actually do it on chain, and they're starting to finally kind of nail that down. It's definitely one to watch and to keep an eye on. Projects to watch include Premia, Lyra, Avo, and more. After Options is DA, or data availability. I kind of already talked about this earlier, so I'm not going to go too in depth, but data availability is, again, the concept of like different blockchains using, instead of Ethereum for data availability, a separate data availability blockchain to make transactions cheaper. Projects to watch include Celestia, Polygon, Eigenlayer, Near, and more. Finally, the last narrative to keep an eye on is BRC20 tokens and ordinals. BRC20s and ordinals are basically just tokens on the Bitcoin network. Traditionally, the Bitcoin network was just used for Bitcoin. There were no tokens, there were no NFTs, there was no apps on the Bitcoin network. It was just Bitcoin. That is until some really creative devs figured out a way to create tokens on the Bitcoin network and to create NFTs, and it's unlocked this weird sort of renaissance on the Bitcoin network. And it's actually causing a lot of like different factions to pop up within Bitcoin, where like half of them love it and think it's the greatest thing ever, and the other half absolutely hate it and would stop it if they could. I'm not super up to speed on BRC20 tokens and ordinals myself. It isn't an area that I've personally dove into a ton, but I do know people that trade exclusively essentially directly in BRC20 in ordinals and have done like 100x trades and all kinds of stuff. There's a whole world of different things happening in that space that I'm just not super aware of myself, but it's definitely one to keep an eye on. That's it. I know I didn't get maybe all of the different narratives, but this was already a super long video as it is. As always, none of this was investment advice. None of this was me telling you to buy these things. You should always do your own research. Definitely make sure to check out my podcast if you're wanting to go more in depth and learn more about some of these concepts. If this video is helpful, make sure to hit the like button. If you want to see more videos like this, make sure to hit that subscribe button and the little bell next to it to be notified each time I release a video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next week.